The academia-biotech industry interface is more important than ever as biomedical innovation continues to attain new heights, while the Trump administration moves to inject turbulence into business as usual across U.S. universities. Welcome to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Today we are previewing the second BioCentury Grand Rounds U.S. Conference, which is scheduled to take place in June, right after ASCO. It will be June 4th through the 6th. And joining me to help set the stage for the event are Michelle Hoffman, Executive Director of the Chicago Biomedical Consortium, Meera Raja, SVP of Deep Tech at P33, that's a nonprofit focused on driving growth for Chicago's tech sector, and joining us from longtime BioCentury partner McKinsey and Company is Daniel von Bornstadt. He's an associate partner at the firm. And from the BioCentury side, we have Editor-in-Chief Simone Fishburne, who is, of course, a fixture on the podcast, and Karen Tkach-Tusman, who heads up discovery and translational coverage at BioCentury. And we'll even have a cameo by BioCentury's very own Josh Berlin, who is head of BD and makes all of our conferences go. And I'm Jeff Cranmer, and I'd like to bring in Simone and Karen to kick us off to tell us what the key themes of this year's Grand Rounds Conference are. Simone, let me go to you first.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, it is a pleasure to be organizing our second Grand Rounds Conference following the success of our inaugural conference in Nashville last year. So this year, as you pointed out, we are in Chicago, a major and important center for biomedical research and innovation. And I'm not only saying that because my kids went to university around that region, but as it happens, I do know that there's a lot of really, really great things going on there. So in terms of themes, let's just think about it at two levels. At the one level, our perpetual theme for Grand Rounds is translational bottlenecks, is getting inside the scientific bottlenecks that either solving them would unlock huge opportunities in biotech, or they're not all bottlenecks. Some of them are emerging opportunities. And we have these organized along 3 scientific tracks. I'm actually going to pivot to my colleague Karen in a minute to walk you through the 3 tracks and break down a little bit of what's inside them without giving too much away, right, Karen? But I also want to talk about a second stream of content at the meeting. In addition to the McKinsey presentation, which you'll hear about in a minute, we have a fireside chat that I'm extremely excited to do with John Sedgwick of AbbVie, sitting down with the head of a pharma discovery unit is always an incredibly interesting conversation. We get quite into the science and the strategy of what they're doing. This is not about AbbVie's pipeline. It's about where he thinks innovation is going to go and what he thinks are the key trends that we should be looking at. And of course, we have a keynote speech or keynote talk from Marty Burke of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. That one always gets me for some reason. So those are 2 of the featured sessions. And in addition, we have Lou Borio of Arch Ventures and previously of various roles in infectious disease and in government. And in fact, what we're going to be talking about there, or they are going to be talking about there, is one of the most important things going on right now, which is not to sit around and complain about all the lack of funding, which is something to complain about, but really to start thinking about what are the future models? How should academia and industry be organizing themselves to address this sudden lack of funding and build some resilience and alternative strategies? So I'm going to stop there and hand it off to Karen to just walk you through the science portion of what we're going to be talking about.
Thanks, Simone. And, the BioCentury Grand Rounds Conference Series is really exciting and important to me because it's where we get really into the weeds of different scientific areas. much like in the way that biocentury analysis deep dive would. And it's really a place for science geeks, a geekcella, if you will, and at the translational early stage science interface. And so really excited to preview some of what we'll be discussing there. So we have 3 tracks. The first track is focused on emerging disease biology. So this is looking at indications, areas where there is momentum or potential for momentum, and what it'll take to unlock that. A panel I will highlight there is very near and dear to my heart, is one around unlocking endometriosis, mechanisms of action and endpoints for pain and beyond. I'll disclose I'm an endometriosis patient, and to me, this is a no-brainer, gigantic indication, huge opportunity, but one where the science and actually the regulatory endpoints have been a bottleneck. And so this is a conversation that I'll be moderating that I'm very excited to have here at Grand Rounds. We also have our accelerating therapeutic modalities track. And here we get into the weeds of engineering modalities and positioning them to provide value, particularly in the crowded spaces where some of these emerging modalities seem to go. There, you'll be hearing about bispecific second wave, looking beyond T-cell engagers and even beyond cancer. There'll be a dive into brain shuttles, and then a conversation around what it takes for new modalities to bring value. Finally, our third track is around enabling technologies. And this is an area where actually, the Chicago ecosystem really shines, because they're really all about that, where engineering meets medicine. Here, within our distillery, innovation distillery team, we keep finding papers from Chicago academics that are bringing up new ways of measuring human biology, for example, with new ways of looking at different species of RNA and protein forms and what they reveal about disease biology. But we'll also be looking into multimodal data, particularly in cancer. And this, coming off of ASCO, there'll be a lot of great voices in town to contribute to that. And then just a sneak peek around quantum computing is something we'll be diving into there, because that's also a Chicago specialty.
Excellent. Well, speaking of Chicago, I'd like to bring Michelle into the conversation here and ask, why is now the right time to hold an event like this in the city of big shoulders, Chicago?
Thanks for that question. So I run the Chicago Biomedical Consortium, and our goal is to bridge the gap between academic discovery and actually investable biotech companies. And what we do is, at the academic level, we'll bring in VC grade rigor and industry discipline without the equity grab, right? So because the companies at the stage just really can't afford that. So we use grants and other patient capital at this stage. We work across 9 universities in Illinois and have a very rigorous process to screen and fund only the most promising academic science. And we are needed more than ever. I think the opportunity has never been greater. Biotech is critical to the US, also to the world, and it all starts with early innovation. But in the US right now, we're having a slowdown globally, we're having a slowdown in venture investment. We are also having gaps in federal funding. And so early stage innovations that could become biomedical products are getting crushed, both from the generating side and the translating side. And so I think it's important more than ever to bring together experienced operators and investors with these early stage entrepreneurs, academics, to give them not just money, but a framework, and really to support early stage academic innovation, which is what Grand Rounds is about.
And Michelle, why Chicago now then?
I think that first and foremost, as Karen said, we bring a very unique mindset to innovation. It's very engineering heavy. And I like to say, we don't just have wet labs, right? We have predictive models and automation, et cetera. And you can go through all of our flagship universities that have excellent scientists working on cell biology, immunobiology, et cetera. But then you'll go to UIUC and find the Molecule Maker Lab, or Argonne, which has the Trillion Parameters Consortium and exascale supercomputer open to biologists, right? Northwestern is a leader in microelectronics and also synthetic biology. What you're really seeing is a new way, or a different way, if you will, of thinking about innovation. And then the second reason is, so we talk a lot about Chicago, but we are interested in Illinois and honestly, the greater Midwest. And Chicago is a gateway to Midwestern innovation. The Midwest has a ton of IP and innovation, but we don't yet have mature networks to develop them. And the pandemic showed us that we don't have to build them from scratch, right? We can build a company in a distributed manner. And this is really important as we start to build biotechs in the new normal that are actually hybrid, right? So they're running lean, they're running virtually, and that's actually an advantage for a place like Chicago, where we can take some of our innovation and tap into experience networks on the coast to build these kinds of hybrid companies that run lean. And that is vital in a time where capital is scarce. And I think Chicago could lead the way on a new type of company model.
Excellent. And UIUC, there you go, Simone. It's very easy to say. It just sort of rolls off the tongue. Mira, let me bring you into the conversation now. Tell us a little bit about how things look in Chicago from where you sit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Jeff. So I'm Mira Raj. I work for P33. We are an economic development nonprofit, and we're really looking at, as you mentioned, sort of inclusive growth in this tech space for our region. And I think the opportunity is so great right now. I'm going to double down on a couple of the things Michelle said and really reference sort of the breadth of what Karen set us up with, right? When Karen started talking about this, she didn't just talk about biotech, but she also talked about the different universities. She talked about the models in which we're working on, but then she also talked about quantum. And I think there's a lot of value in thinking about how we're bridging a lot of these pieces. And there's a lot of opportunity around this. Something Illinois in our region, like the Midwest region, whatever you want to call our region. Our region for a long time, I think a lot of Illinois, what we've been working on is building up a lot of the building blocks of these ecosystems. And when we think about what our bio strengths are, as an example, to just zoom in on a part of that, biotech is a piece of it, but we actually also have ag tech, and we have biofermentation, and we have manufacturing, and we have all these pieces that we've been building up. And one thing that we do so well, and organizations like mine do, and organizations like Michelle's do, is think about how to connect all of those pieces together. And I think right now, it's more important than ever as we think about how these systems connect to build something new moving forward. How can you use these advances in, molecular biology and genetics and AI engineering and automation, and sort of usher in a new era where we can use this biotech for medicine or food or materials or industrial products, all of those different things. And being able to really bring those parts together shows the power of our ecosystem. And then can we activate those assets to really be able to drive bio to a space that's both regionally helpful, right? Of course, we care about regional economic development, but how are we driving the nation and the world?
So it sounds like a lot of the pieces of the biotech ecosystem in Chicago are in place.
Absolutely. I think we have been building the capabilities for discovery. Things like we have a Chan Zuckerberg BioHub here that has a number of our universities working together. We're thinking about development and what does the infrastructure for that look like. We have more shared lab spaces at Portal Innovations, larger spaces around the region, networks of these experts. Michelle went a little bit into that, some of the manufacturing spaces for biotech. So we have all of those components. The one other thing I would add that I think we do so well in the region is we do think about who are the other players in this? And so our local government is really bought into this. Our state cares a lot about this. Biotech is actually in their 5-year economic development plan, which is huge, right? Because if you think about how you're bringing all of these pieces here, how you're bringing new folks into the mix, how you're funding it, how you're building all of this up, you need some of that work, both from the scientists, the infrastructure builders, and the other ecosystem players who can help support it.
Fabulous. Well, it sounds like Chicago is an excellent location for this. And This meeting coming right after ASCO all the more highlights kind of the prominence of what is going on in Chicagoland at this time of year. Now, one of the big perks of joining a BioCentury conference is our long-term partner, McKinsey, puts together a fabulous report, gives a presentation, and attendees of the conference get a sneak peek at this report. And of course, as investors know, getting information ahead of time is always a little bit helpful, gives you an edge. I'd like to bring in Daniel. Daniel, you are heading up this report, working on it with your colleagues at McKinsey. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and also thanks to the whole BioCentury team for our long-standing collaboration. Very grateful for that one. Maybe just starting with a couple of observations more generally on biopharma innovation the last decade. When we look at it, of course, enormously productive. That means CAR T in oncology, now also in autoimmune. That means also abundance of new targets or the rise of new targets. Think about anti-amyloid, anti-tau, also GLP-1. Think about the reaction to COVID. But at the same time, we are seeing significant and always intensified crowding in these promising MOAs. We think about GLP-1, there are more than 100 assets right now in this one target alone, and that is all clinical development. We also see oncology, more than tripled competition in immunology in the most important MOAs, and this over the past 20 years. So what that means taken together, it's not only important for biotech and pharma companies to have the most compelling innovation, to be best in class or first in class. It is equally as important to have world-class, fastest, and also high-quality execution. And that is where our report this time will focus on. It's the importance of execution excellence. We looked a bit into our data, and it looks like the current baseline from getting from target identification all the way to first in human is roughly 5 to 7 years. Now, we have seen that can go much, much faster. Example is COVID. I mean, think the sequence of COVID released in Jan 2020, and it took 3, 4, 5 months to get in the first human being, and we had actual data from phase 1-2 as early as July and August 2020. Of course, not all drugs can be handled like a COVID vaccine, but what we have seen is a whole suite of levers to get that timeline down from, say, these 5 to 7 years, down 30, 40, 50%. And so we are thinking that is realistic. We have seen that in the real world. And in this report, we will give an idea of how this can be achieved. And maybe just giving 1 or 2 ideas, we'll unwrap more in the conference itself. The first one is simply process planning. Think about the in-life portion of toxicology. Right now, most companies plan like 90 days for it, but mostly it's done within 14 to 28 days. So why not just take the baseline at 28 days and take an outlier for longer so that individual interventions take 1-2 months, but this really overall reduces white space, sometimes by years. And the second one, more technology-wise, think about Gen AI. Like all the modules we have to write for the approval of an IND, many of those could be done with Gen AI. That has been done right now, not already, but many pharma companies are thinking about doing that, and that could also reduce time for a process from a couple of weeks, sometimes even a couple of months down to minutes. And so I think giving this idea of ultimately having the same transparency of data and also having the same rigor of process as we see evolving in clinical could really shave down timelines and help, of course, patients to get access to these treatments faster, and then also biotech and pharma companies to secure value. So maybe this is just an initial thought. We'll get to more when it comes later, but this is what mostly our talk will be about.
Daniel, you talked a lot about timelines and accelerating innovation. I think a lot of what we will be talking about, and it certainly comes up in every AI conversation, but various other opportunities with the translational bottlenecks, is increasing shots on goal. So can you compare your thoughts about shots on goal versus shortening timelines for drug development? Because they seem to be differently achievable, shall we say?
Yes. So I would say, of course, there are maybe several angles to think about. Industry as a whole has right now way more shots on goal than there used to be. Think about the crowding in these MOAs. So that means industry-wise, we are seeing many different assets in the same targets, right? So the chance of getting the best in class and really best in class GLP-1, of course, we have more than 100 assets right now. Individual companies, I think they can do a lot to increase their chance of individual shots right now. especially oncology, but also others, you can understand biology, you can understand relationship between MOA and a certain disease way better right now. Also power of AI, power of multimodal data sets. So I think that is where companies are trying to increase their chances. I wouldn't say necessarily try way more assets or program for one individual.
Let me just interrupt and ask, but that may be a leading indicator, but have we seen that actually translate to better ratios of drugs that enter phase 1 to getting approved, or that enter the preclinical top of the funnel to getting tested in man? Because you could argue that with something like AI or whatever, maybe it shouldn't be 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000. It should be 1 in 10 or 1 in 5. Something, a real step change. What are your thoughts about that?
Like, we are all looking for that exact data. And look, we are monitoring this year over year, like how this funnel shifts. I would say it's a pretty lagging indicator to see the overall clinical POS changing. It's a bit harder to see that preclinical funnel because less of that is publicly available data. We see still like this 10% or so success rate overall of clinical development. I wouldn't say that by now that has changed significantly. What we do see is that drugs that have a foundation in human genetics, they have a higher chance of succeeding in development. But I would say until that really gets into the entire pipeline, that will take some more time.
And Michelle and Mira, you're both really at that forefront of preclinical innovation, interfacing with academics where the stuff is coming fresh out of the labs. I'm wondering if you've been seeing acceleration in terms of the pace of what academics are able to do, say, versus 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We hear about, new methodologies that are making things that used to take a long time take less time. Is that something you see on the ground?
For sure. Across all of early stage discovery, we're seeing that at the academic level. And, like I said, automation, AI, it's making its way into the lab. The issue that we have is the academics don't necessarily have the funding to scale it, right? So they can do a lot of these projects and use predictive models, but to really generate the types of data sets that you need is extremely expensive. I think that's where our bottleneck is at the sort of that academic industry interface. And that's also an area where the CBC and P33 and a bunch of other organizations are thinking about how do we bolster this? How do we bring sort of industrialized data sets to these very unique academic ideas?
And actually at BioCentury Grand Rounds, one of the, I think, really interesting sessions will be a pharma BD roundtable where folks who are in the position of in-licensing external innovation at pharmas, including J&J and Daiichi Sankyo, will be providing some workshop style advice to the folks who, the academic innovators who are producing some of these data sets about what is it that they want to see.
Karen, great point about the BD roundtable. I think that'll certainly be one of the highlights. Another one we added this year that I think is going to be a really good session is our breakfast workshop on venture philanthropy and why arguably now it's more important than ever for early stage funding. So we'll have a panel of several in the venture philanthropy space talking about how essentially the academics can access their funding often as the first funding in the door. And they also bring a lot of other attributes in addition to the financing itself. So access to KOLs and patient groups and other ways to hopefully accelerate the projects into development. So I think that'll be a really, really good session on the morning of June 6th.
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. I'm curious, Daniel, Mira, are there any sessions that you're particularly interested in tuning into, or any speakers you're looking forward to hearing from?
I can start quickly. We saw last year already featured a bit on women's health. So I think thinking this time there's a whole breakout session in endometriosis. Also, Karen mentioned this one. I think that is interesting for us to see these like underserved disease areas. What we'll be seeing across the industry is, again, crowding in the most exciting, most innovative areas right now, but also more and more expansion to white space. So I think seeing that at BioCentury is pretty exciting, and we'll definitely tune in for those ones.
Yeah, and I think there's such a richness of what you all are bringing here. can't pick just one, but I'm going to because I think this is a short podcast and I can't talk about all of them. But I would say I'm really excited about the quantum one. I think, again, sort of going back to what we started the session talking about, I'm just really excited on how you can move the needle in biotech by interfacing with other subject areas and other sectors. And I think quantum is a really, really interesting example of that. So I'm very excited for that one.
Excellent. And for my part, I'd like to just mention that we are going to have a great group of presenting companies at the event. And some of our colleagues that we're working with in Chicago are busy nominating companies that they think would be great additions to the program. We're looking for pre-seed companies, seed companies, Series A companies working on cutting edge innovation. And we would welcome them to raise their hand and let us know if they're interested in presenting at the Chicago Grand Rounds in early June, or as maybe Josh can give a little teaser on, the inaugural Grand Rounds Europe, which will be in September. Josh, a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's right, Jeff. So we will have a second edition of Grand Rounds this year, our first edition in Europe, and that'll be in Cambridge, UK. September 17 to 19. And we also, wanted to plug that there is a special offer. If you'd like to attend both the Chicago and Cambridge events, you can register at a discount. You can find out all the information you need to know at biocenturygrandrounds.com. For the Chicago event, I also wanted to plug that we're running in a great advanced rate discount right now that expires May 9th. We also have a special rate for investors that expires May 2nd. And importantly, partnering for Grand Rounds Chicago will open on May 12th. We really think now is more than ever is very, very important for folks to meet face to face. And we have a absolutely great program, but we also have an opportunity for folks to take part in the partnering and take part in the networking and hopefully meet with investors and BD&L leaders and academic innovators face to face in Chicago.
Yeah, some of the investors that I know are coming include 4Bio Capital, Arch Venture, Astellas Ventures, Deerfield, Lightspeed, Novartis, Portal, which is obviously a local Chicago group, Syncona rolling out from the UK, Third Rock, and quite a few more. Josh, did I miss anyone there?
There's quite a few that will be on site. If you look at our website, you can see a full list of who will be attending in Chicago, as well as the list of speakers. Just a great, great program this year that Simone and Karen and others have put together for us.
And I just wanted to say, this is really a geekchella in the sense that you can really get down into the details of your science, of your mechanisms, of your tools, of your technologies. And one thing I've heard from founders sometimes is that there are certain kind of panel or pitch events where they feel like, they can't get too into the weeds. They have to keep it, short and snappy, and they don't get to geek out. And they've been jealous after seeing one of our panels about how much into the science they can get. And so particularly if you've got that type of a story where it's like meeting face to face with people who will get the science, who will meet you on that level, this is the place to do it. And we've gotten some really great feedback from folks ranging from junior faculty in labs who came to last year's Grand Rounds in Nashville, got that one meeting on the partnering system that then opened up a whole slew of other connections. And that person, I think, is percolating, potentially spinning out a company. Got to meet some of the really top names in the business to help at least advise them on that, if not invest. We've heard of partnering discussions with pharmas that got their start at Grand Rounds and CEOs who found that they were meeting people at our last meeting that they weren't meeting anywhere else. It's just a place where sometimes with these large academic meetings, for example, you're getting into the science, but there's a lot of mechanism. There's a lot of stuff that isn't so directly translationally relevant, right? And then sometimes at these kind of JP Morgan type meetings, it's all business, 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 and an innovator might not quite find their footing there. And this is really that special in-between place where I think a lot of magic happens. So we hope you'll join us there.
And if you're so geeky that you did not get Karen's reference to Coachella there, I think that's what she was going for. And if you happen to be at Coachella and got to see the Go-Go's joined by Billie Joe Armstrong, well, kudos to you. Speaking of music, we were in Nashville last year and there was a John Bon Jovi sighting at one of our adjacent events. And John Bon Jovi, being John Bon Jovi, also rescued someone from a bridge during the conference. So we're going to Chicago. Anything can happen. Well, that is a wrap for this podcast. I appreciate Michelle, Daniel, and Mira joining us, helping us with the event. Karen, Simone, as always, appreciate your insights. And Josh, what can I say? Well, I'll say it to you privately, perhaps. Kendall Square Orchestra, always in my good book. They provide the music for BioCentury this week. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music, there's that M word again, while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.